Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Society of Bangor. I am Reverend Drew Moeller, and it is a pleasure to have those of you who are in our beloved sanctuary here at 120 Park Street, and to those of you who are joining us online, welcome, welcome, welcome. If you're joining us today for the first time, we are glad that you are here. And if you're joining us online for the first time, we invite you to stay after the service for the virtual coffee hour. And if you are here in the sanctuary, we hope that you'll get a chance to mingle with some of our people here after on your way out. It's always great to have new people joining us. How are people holding up with the time change and the weather change and all the change that's happening? Yeah, there's a lot going on. And just as there's a lot going on in the rest of the world, there's also a lot going on in our beloved community. So I'm going to ask Ben to pull up our announcement slides so we can let people know what is happening. First, we have a slide here that kind of encapsulates all the things that are coming up this week. All the wonderful activities. If you want to learn more about those activities, you can always contact the office or visit our website or Facebook page and get the update on all the different offerings that we have this coming week. Next slide, Ben. Today at noon, out on the sidewalk in front of the church, we'll be having our second Sunday food collection and concert. Robin Wood will be playing the chimes today, and we'll be sounding a chime at the end of the concert for every person who's been lost to COVID in the last month. And there's quite a few, I think over 200 names. But the food that we collect will go to the Ecumenical Food Pantry, and we've been doing a really great job of collecting food. I haven't been keeping track lately, but I think we're probably about 6,000 pounds worth of food that we've gathered since we started this. So bring your food at noon and stay for the chimes. All right, Ben. The Spirit of Drumming Circle, apparently there's a little confusion about the announcements, and that the Spirit of Drumming is not going to happen this Sunday, but we'll be returning next month. Lori? No? Okay, so right now, just keep watching the e-news for updates of if and when the Drumming Circle will return. Next slide. Our spiritual exploration for our young people. Today we'll be meeting at Prentice Woods at 2 p.m. for their family-style spiritual exploration experience in the Circle of Trees. So if you want to participate in that, show up at the Prentice Woods parking lot at 2 p.m. Next slide. I'm going to ask Valerie to come forward and give us a little update about some wonderful things that we're doing as far as collecting money and goods for Ukrainian support.
Unitarian Universalist Association and the Unitarian Universalist Social Justice basically is asking congregations to make donations to the Ukraine refugee effort. And so starting next week, we're going to be collecting medical supplies, and those will be picked up and brought down to Portland, which will then be shipped over to Poland and then going to Ukraine. And I'll be passing out this handout after church today, and it's also going to be posted on Facebook and every place else about how to make donations, either cash or medical supplies. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. And I think you've got a handout. That handout is going to include information on what medical supplies are being accepted, because they're not accepting just everything. There are certain things that they want and certain things they don't want. So you will definitely want to check the list of goods that are available. And council has also decided this month to change our share of the plate. So half of what we collect and are offering in the basket over here, or if you do that online, will go to the UU Service Committee that has partners in Hungary and other countries around surrounding Ukraine that will go to help refugees. And the Service Committee tends to build relationships with communities that are underserved. So the people that they're going to be working with and partnering with, they have long established relationships with. And will go to help people who are often marginalized, especially in refugee situations like LGBTQ plus people who this can be a very scary transition, even scarier for them. So next slide. I told you there were many. This is just a reminder that you can fulfill your pledge or make a contribution to our community by going online, or as I said, we've got a basket here for those of you who are in person in the sanctuary. Next slide. Okay, I now want to ask Phyllis Havens to come forward and just give us a little update on our Riding the Waves of Change stewardship pledge program that's going on right now.
At the moment, but it's got a positive forward direction. I work with Amy Stuckey-Lamb and her husband Mike, and Connie McVeigh and myself are the financial stewardship team running the pledge campaign this year. And so far, we have $77,359 and 41 pledge units have pledged. Now we're shooting for 126,000. So we have a ways to go. We are so thankful and grateful for those that have already pledged. This was the deadline, this Sunday, for getting your pledges in. So after this, you may be getting phone calls. So we are really, really, really hoping that everybody can pay attention to this because, of course, as we've said many times, our budget can't be done until we know what we're working with. So thank you for everybody that has pledged, and if you've not done it yet, please do.
Perhaps we have this backwards and we're offering the incentive of getting a phone call. Maybe people want phone calls. That's entirely possible for such a social group. Okay. With that said, let us take a moment to center ourselves before we move into our time for worship. Take a couple deep breaths. Find the comfortable place in the pew or the sofa or wherever you are sitting and joining us from. Feel the sense of lightness of the crisp, cold morning this morning, even with the shortness of the day, the hour that was left behind. Still something about the bright sunny day after a gloomy, stormy day that renews a sense of hope in our hearts, a warmth of spirit as we come together in this time and place to worship together. As we do so, we are grateful for all of you who are joining us today. Please know that you are welcome here, just as you are. And now I'm going to ask Ben to bring our morning introit.
Come and find the quiet center in the crowded life we lead. Find the room for hope to enter. Find the frame where we are freed. Clear the chaos and the heartache. Clear our eyes that we can see all the things that really matter. Be at peace and simply be. Silence is a friend who claims us, cools the heat and slows the pace. Love it is who speaks and names us, knows our being, touches base, making space within our thinking, lifting shades to
Thank you, Molly, again for your wonderful gift of music. And I also want to introduce Jacob Lamontagne, our new collaborative accompanist. He's actually been with us for like 4 months now, but this is your first time in a service, right? So can we raise our hands and give a little welcome to Jacob? I'm now going to invite our worship associate, as we now have people in the room, to come and offer our morning chalice lighting.
May our faith be renewed and reignited by Reverend Dr. Rebecca A. Savage. We light our flaming chalice each week with a simple spark to make holy our time together. With this flame, may our highest intentions be refreshed. With this flame, may we remember who we are and whose we are. With this flame, may our faith be renewed and reignited to guide our journey. Amen. Blessed be, and may it be so. Reading? The reading this morning is entitled Accepting the Faith by Martha Nussbaum. It doesn't work when you whisper behind a mask. Okay, yes. I don't have a schedule here. We invite you all for the opening hymn. Don't know the number. It's on the screen.
Thank Tim and Judy for being our logistics coordinators this morning. Our story this morning for all ages is a folk tale that comes from Finland, titled The Wise Princess. And just a disclaimer, I've adapted it a little bit, trying to make it a little bit more modern in some of its concepts around relationships. Once upon a time, a king had a daughter whose name was Marja, who he wished to be the wisest woman in the world. And so he sent far and wide for the finest scholars, teachers from everywhere. Daily, they taught Marja all they knew. Marja loved learning, and most of all, she loved the many languages of the world. She learned Greek and English and Spanish and French and Japanese. She learned Portuguese and Latin and German and Chinese. Before long, Marja knew more than all of her teachers combined. She would speak to every visitor to the palace in their own native language. Soon, Marja talked to her father and shared her desire to find a partner. After some consultation, she sent out a proclamation. Princess Marja will marry the person who can speak a language that she does not know. A little ego there. Beware, suitors. Anyone who dares to seek the hand of the princess but cannot speak a new language will be thrown into the wintry sea. The proclamation went out far and wide, and everybody who knew the princess just kind of sighed and they shook their heads as they grumbled amongst themselves. Nobody knows as many languages as the princess, they all agreed. And of course, because of her high expectations, no one came for Marja's hand in marriage. Marja grew lonely and sad. Father, will no one marry me? She asked. Her father took her daughter's hand in his, and he said, I fear that might be true, dear daughter. Sadly, there seems no one wise enough for you. Meanwhile, outside the palace, a young shepherd came with a leather satchel and appeared at the gates. I am Matty, the shepherd announced to the king's guards. I have come to seek the hand of the wise Princess Marja. The king's guards laughed. One of them said, Go run to your flock, shepherd. You could never hope to marry such a marvelous woman. Run before the king throws you into the sea. But Matty smiled. Open the gates, he said. I can speak many languages that the princess has never even heard of before. The guards shook their head. Give up, shepherd, another guard said. I will not, the shepherd proudly responded. And so at last the guards led Matty to the king's throne room. There the lovely princess sat beside her father. When she saw the shepherd, she smiled, for she liked the gleam in the shepherd's eye. Your Majesty, the guards announced, this shepherd has come to woo your daughter. Princess Marja was delighted by the suitor, but she was also a little bit unsure. Father, she whispered, please don't harm this shepherd. The king looked at Matty and frowned. If you dare to fail to speak an unknown language, do you know what will happen to you? The king said to the shepherd. Matty smiled. I do, the shepherd replied, and I am not afraid of the sea. Besides, I believe that you will find that your daughter does not know all there is to know. The king shrugged. Speak her language then, he said. And quickly, Matty walked to the princess's side. Beautiful princess, he said, listen closely. Reaching into his satchel, the shepherd pulled out a tiny sparrow. Zoo, 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 the sparrow chirped. Matty turned to the princess. Do you understand the sparrow? The princess shook her head. But princess, Matty said calmly, you claim to understand all languages. The sparrow asks if it can sit on your shoulder. The shepherd let the sparrow go and then whispered, see, see, see. And the sparrow flew at once and sat on the princess's shoulder. Marja clapped her hands. Oh, how wonderful, she cried. Wait, the shepherd said again, reaching again into the satchel, this time pulling out a shiny black crow. Caw, the crow cried, and Maddie patted the bird's head. So sorry, the shepherd said, placing the crow gently upon the floor. You understood, of course, Maddie asked the princess. She shook her head no. The crow wants its freedom, Maddie said, and the shepherd walked to the door and opened it. Whee, whee, the shepherd cried, and the crow heard those words and flew out the door to its freedom. Again, the princess stared. How do you know what they say? She asked. Maddie smiled. I have spent days in the forest listening carefully, and I can speak the language of the birds and the beasts. If you will marry me, I will teach you that there are so many languages even the greatest scholars do not know. The king was furious. He turned to his daughter. I thought you were the most learned person in the world. How can you let this lowly shepherd make a fool of you? Maddie once again stepped forward and said, Sire, your daughter is actually wise beyond words, the shepherd said. For only the wise could admit that they do not know everything. Marja was so pleased with Maddie's understanding that she begged her father to accept Maddie. The king, seeing the joy in his daughter's face, knew that he was wrong to have judged Maddie so harshly. If my daughter wished to marry you, he said, I will wish you both great joy. Maddie and Marge married and lived happily ever after, always surrounded by birds and beasts, always seeking wisdom, and always wise enough to know that they could always learn a little bit more. That ends our story. Just as our story tells a meaningful piece of information that informed Maddie and Marge's life and many others who have heard the story, so too do our lives inform the meaning making that we have of what it means to be alive and present in this world. And we set aside time in our service every Sunday, the joys and sorrows that give our life meaning, and also tear sometimes at our heartstrings. So today, if you have a joy or sorrow, I invite you, if you're in the sanctuary, to come forward and form a line behind me here. And I've invited Sue McKay, our worship associate, will read the joys and sorrows that are expressed on the chat online. And we'll alternate between in-person and online. So now's the time, if you're in the sanctuary and you want to come forward, and if you're online, to type your joy or sorrow in the chat. All set? And finally, I light one last candle for all the joys and sorrows that remain within the deep recesses of our hearts and those that are ever present just below the surface. May they find hope, love, understanding, and may they find a nonviolent release. Dear friends, please join me in the spirit of meditation and prayer. Great universal spirit, interconnected web of which we are a part, we gather to hold up the joys and sorrows that make up the life of this congregation and our individual lives. As we share, we grow closer to each other, and today we hold up the anniversaries of loved ones who have passed. We hold those in our community who are sick and healing. And we celebrate the birthdays, the connections of people returning into the beloved sanctuary and those who are here for the first time. Spirit, deep in our hearts, we pray for the people of Ukraine and all the refugees and also all the people who are involved in that conflict, both Ukrainian and Russian together, for the atrocities that people are committing in the belief that somehow this will make the world a better place. May we continue to send hope and caring and prayers for this conflict to end as swiftly as it began. Spirit, we gather and share these joys and sorrows because we know that each life tells an important story and each life holds a deep and abiding truth. By coming together in this way and sharing our joys and sorrows with each other, we grow closer to each other and we grow closer to becoming one. Blessed be. Amen.
This is Accepting Faith by Martha Nussbaum. Being a human means accepting promises from other people and trusting that other people will be good to you. When that is too much to bear, it is always possible to retreat into the thought, I'll live for my own comfort, for my own vengeance, for my own anger, and I just won't be a member of society anymore. That means I won't be a human anymore. You see people doing that today where they feel that society has let them down, that they can't ask anything of it, that they can't put their hopes on anything outside themselves. You see them actually retreating into a life in which they think only of their own satisfaction and maybe the satisfaction of their vengeance against society. But the life that no longer trusts another human being and no longer forms ties to the political community is not a human life any longer.
My life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentation. in the night it giveth. No storm can shake my inmost calm. I hear the music ringing, since love is Lord of heaven and earth. How can I keep from singing? My life flows on in endless song, above earth's lamentation. I hear the river that hails unto creation. No storm can shake my inmost calm. I hear the music ringing. It sounds alarm in my soul. How can I keep from singing? How can I keep from singing?
Thank you, Jacob, for pinch hitting there with all of our being out of the sanctuary for a while. How can we remember to change the batteries? So it is a trying time, this time of late winter where we have a couple of warm days followed by a blizzard. It feels like spring should really be here by now, but its delivery has been delayed. I feel like a kid when I ordered something from the Johnson Smith Company catalog that never seemed to arrive. It took months and months, it seemed. This past week, as I was preparing for today's service, I found myself humming along to the works of our special music. My life goes on, an endless song, above earth's lamentation. Yet for some reason, I couldn't get past the hum. I didn't feel like singing. I have a strong faith in the human capacity to do good, yet I confess that I find that my faith is challenged when I see images of refugees fleeing war-torn countries and hearing news about wholesale bombing of Ukrainian civilians and nuclear power plants and maternity hospitals. I don't feel like singing. Instead, I feel more like crying. Factor in a couple days of this teasing warm weather followed by sleet and snow, and the news from around our country of laws being passed to limit a woman's right to choose what she can do with her body in certain states, and to those laws being passed that make it illegal to educate, support, or help LGBTQ+ youth have access to information and supportive treatments that are life-saving. I want to cry. And that's on top of that, we've got inflation and rising gas prices and speculations of gloom and doom around midterm elections. It takes a lot of energy not to get caught up in the toxicity of regular news cycles. My sense of well-being this past week has felt challenged. So how can we find space to sing the songs of hope and encouragement and love amidst all this turmoil? How can we witness everything that seems to be going wrong in the world and still feel like somehow we're okay? that faith in hope, equality, justice, and the creation of the kind of world that we all want to live in is still possible. It's not easy. And yet, in the craziness of this world gone asunder, the question needs to be asked and deserves an answer. To me, the answer lies in the balance of awareness between our heart, our head, and our humanity. Our hearts are great sensing organs. When we are in tune with them, they help us experience the suffering of the world with equanimity. Our hearts attract what we need to nourish our souls. Our hearts allow us a place within ourselves and to observe and understand other people's situations and know what they need and what we need to achieve balance in the world. And I think in our story earlier, the princess, who might have been skeptical about the shepherd, but she was able to see beyond that with her heart and notice the gleam in the shepherd's eye. The problem is that we are wired with an autonomic response system. Neurologists estimate that our auto-response survival instincts are almost 10 times stronger than our altruistic ones. This propensity to focus on what is wrong is called a negativity bias, which means that we need to hear 10 positive things to help maintain an equilibrium for every negative message that we hear. That's a lot, huh? I don't know about you, but I don't seem to be getting that kind of balance on the news feed, even on National Public Radio or PBS. Our Unitarian Universalist ancestors founded a religion that is based not just on the heart, but also in our ability to use our rational mind and to see the world with greater perspective. Though this is a sensible approach, it helps us take a fix and realize that our brains are wired to that negativity loop. And being able to know that helps us try to work around our biases. It allows us to see the world in a clearer way that is more evidence-based. At its best, reason provides us with a useful balance in those moments when we feel the tsunami of suffering and sadness coming over us. Reason and emotions combined can help us realize there are seasons and patterns to the world in which we live. There are ups, there are downs that are only, and that the only constant in the universe is change. Today, we may feel overwhelmed. Tomorrow, we may feel happy and joyful. All we need to do is sit and wait for the tide to turn. Reason at its best keeps us open to possibilities. At its worst, reason can also be very limiting, especially when we reduce the world to generalities. Statistics say that this will happen instead of, in the past, given what feels like similar circumstances, there's a probability that we might go in this direction. Prejudgment was the energy that I felt that was at play in our story with the king father figure and the guards who presumed that a shepherd could not be possibly smart or intelligent as them. The third part of our balancing act of maintaining and renewing our faith is our humanity and humility. This is important for any belief system because often it predicts how our reasoning and biases play out. Take, for instance, the theologies of the nature of human beings. Suppose we follow the Calvinistic perspective of humanity's moral depravity. In that case, we tend to have a mind that judges and assumes that people are evil, destructive, and incapable of doing better. This leads us to not reform or offer second chances to people, but punishment or simply removing people from society with whom we disagree. On the other hand, if we embrace our more traditional Unitarian perspective of the goodness of humanity, there's less of a bias towards that judgment and more of a mindset that change is possible, even though we make mistakes. Life actually can get better from the mistakes that we make. Allowing ourselves to make those mistakes and feel overwhelmed at times is an essential tool that we need to grow. Allowing ourselves to make mistakes even when we're overwhelmed is essential for our growth. This is the energy that I felt in the shepherd, who was aware that a dip in the wintry ocean was possible, but who remained unafraid in sharing his wisdom with the princess and king. Being present to our humanity and humility also reminds us that we are not in this all alone. When things are going well, when things are not going so well, others often help us gain our equilibrium. There's a tendency that people sometimes become isolated, but the more they struggle and the harder, the more they pull away from other people, the greater the possibility of depression or addiction or overwhelming grief. For the sake of pulling these three components of faith together, I like to use the image of a stool. If we sit on a stool that has one leg, I have seen some stools like that people sometimes take to concerts and stuff, but you watch somebody, it's very difficult to try and balance on a little pole. You constantly have to adjust your muscles so that you don't topple over. If we add a second leg to the stool, we still need to exert some effort to maintain balance, but the effort is a lot less because the stool is reinforced by that second leg. When we add the third leg to the stool, we find balance, and we can rest and trust that that balance will hold our weight without having to pay a lot of attention. The problem with the heart, head, and humanity is that the levels of those energies often fluctuate depending on the factors we are experiencing in our lives that are often beyond our control. Even on a three-legged stool, if one of the legs is of a differing length, the stool will still provide a level of stability. The work of renewing our faith is the ability to monitor and be present to the size or the length of the legs on that stool as elements of our faith. If we are deeply sad or caught up in the emotion of loss or scarcity, we need to find ways to shore up or lengthen that part of the stool. If our mind is closed to emotion, full of generalizations, then we need to either increase or shorten that rational leg of the stool. If we feel isolated or alone or down on ourselves, perhaps humanity or our humility needs adjustment. These are the strategies that I try to monitor in my spiritual practice, and they help. When one leg of the stool feels a little wobbly, I look for a way to strengthen it. This week, with all the sad news about the Russian invasion in Ukraine, I am filled with the horror of the images that I see on my TV screen. My heart is overwhelmed. Then I try to think of ways that this conflict might be different. We are not rushing into the conflict with boots on the ground. We are offering support for the Ukrainian people with supplies and sanctions on a level that have never been seen before. This gives me hope. We have world leaders that are working together in ways that make those sanctions so much more powerful and meaningful. And in my mind, we are creating a balance that helps me see the nuances of the situation very differently from the gloom and doom. I don't know that we have found the right mix of sanctions and everything else that's going on, but it gives me hope. It gives me hope. And finally, I am aware of humanity and our need for connection. As a community, we are connected to the countries surrounding the Ukraine through the UU Service Committee, who are working to provide relief for the Ukrainian refugees. Connections like Ben Speed and Valerie Carter's efforts to help gather medical supplies and send them over to the Ukraine through Poland helps renew my faith in humanity. I am in awe of the UU state political action groups around the country who are nationally raising awareness and voices against laws that are aimed to suppress voters' rights and laws that would outlaw women's right to choose what happens in their body, and people of faith who continue to speak against laws denying that life-affirming information for our youth as they try to make sense of their own sexual identities. I also find that in this time of spring, wisdom of the natural world reminds me that there is hope. The world of which we are a part goes through changes that take it off balance and then corrects and adapts to the changes that existence brings. When I'm reminded of that, I often find myself standing in awe of the complexity of the way that the world works and the way that we as human beings can tend to our emotional, mental, and social well-being if we pay attention and appreciate the gifts that we have and the miracle of life of which we are a part. I wish you balance and many successful and wise adjustments to your faith and your outlook and connections with each other and the world of which we are a part as you go into your week, into your month, and into the blessed spring, the time of Earth's renewal. Blessed be. I now invite you to join in singing our closing hymn, O Life That Maketh All Things New. On? There we go. As we extinguish our Unitarian Universalist chalice flame, symbol of faith, hope, love, and connection, and the need to continue to come together and renew our faith, let us be reminded that although our time of worship has come to an end, our service to each other and to the world has just begun. Blessed be. I now invite you to rise and join in singing our benediction.
Let us go forth into the week ahead, striving to be faithful to our life's journeys, serving the needs of the earth and its inhabitants, sharing in the spirit of love with all we say and do, sharing in the spirit of love with all we say and do, sharing in the spirit of love with all we say and do. Blessed be, blessed be, blessed, blessed be.
Microphone off. Oh, thank you all for joining us this morning. For those of you who are on Zoom, we invite you to stay for a virtual coffee hour for about 10 minutes or so. And remember that we are doing the food collection and chimes concert at noon. Go in peace.